My name is Carol, I'm 65 years old, and my only daughter got married without telling me, then demanded my home for her honeymoon. Before I tell you how the wedding gift I sent 3 days later had her new husband screaming for the police, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. For 40 of my 65 years I was a nurse. I've held the hands of the dying and comforted families ripped apart by tragedy. I truly thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak this world has to offer, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what my own flesh and blood, my daughter, was about to do to me. The morning it all began was like any other humid Tampa day. The air was thick enough to swim through, and I was on my porch tending to my orchids. They were my late husband Frank's favorite. He used to say that coaxing a bloom from an orchid was like earning a woman's trust. It took patience, care, and knowing when to just leave it be. I was misting a stubborn phalaenopsis when my phone buzzed against the wicker table. It was Jessica. My Jess. A smile bloomed on my face, genuine and warm. It had been a few weeks. I swiped to answer, my mind already racing with questions I was dying to ask. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice full of the morning's sunshine. "I was just thinking about you. Tell me, have you and Mark set a date? I need to make sure I get the time off work." The silence on the other end was brief, but it was a cold, hard silence. It felt like a stone dropping into a deep well. Then her voice, flat and distant, as if she were talking to a customer service representative. "Oh," she said. "We already got married yesterday, Mom." The tiny misting bottle slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the porch tiles. I didn't even notice. My mind snagged on her words. "Already married. Just a small ceremony," she continued, her voice gaining a rehearsed breezy quality. "Only people who really matter were invited. Only people who really matter." The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. It felt like a punch to the gut. 40 years as a nurse and I couldn't draw my own breath. I, the woman who worked double shifts after Frank's funeral to keep her in private school. The woman who stayed up all night sewing her prom dress, who held her hand through every fever, who celebrated every single one of her triumphs as if they were my own. I didn't matter. I had been erased. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I forced my voice to be steady, even as my world tilted on its axis. I see. Well, congratulations, sweetheart." "Thanks," she said quickly, the relief in her tone palpable. She'd gotten through the hard part. "Listen, there is one thing we need from you. Can you just FedEx us the keys to the Siesta Key house? Daniel says it would be absolutely perfect for our honeymoon." There it was. The real reason for the call. Not to share her joy, not to apologize for the exclusion, but to claim her prize. The beach house. Our sanctuary. The last piece of her father's inheritance I'd clung to. The one place filled with nothing but the ghosts of our laughter. The place where a 12-year-old Jess had stood barefoot in the sand and declared, "I'm going to get married right here someday, Mom." Now she wanted it handed over like a hotel reservation. Something inside me, something that had been soft and yielding for 65 years, began to harden. A cold, quiet calm washed over the initial shock. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I'll make sure you get the keys." She thanked me, rattled off a mailing address and hung up. Just like that. I stood there for a long time, the forgotten misting bottle at my feet, staring out at the lush green of my yard but seeing nothing. He had underestimated me. Mark, this perfect, charming man, thought he could waltz in, turn my daughter against me, and simply take what he wanted. He believed I was just another sentimental old woman who would cry into her tea and fade away. He thought this was the beginning of their honeymoon. He had no idea it was the beginning of my plan. As I stood there, the Florida sun beating down on my neck, I knew this wasn't just about a wedding or a beach house. This was a war for my daughter's soul. And I had just begun to fight. To understand how a man could get such a grip on my daughter, a grip so tight it squeezed me out completely, you have to go back 2 years. Back to the first time Mark walked into my modest Tampa home. Jess had been talking about him for months, her voice buzzing with a kind of bright, hopeful energy I hadn't heard since before her father passed. She'd had her share of disappointments, men who were emotionally unavailable, or simply not ready for the kind of deep, lasting love I knew my daughter deserved. All I ever wanted was for her to find someone who would see the incredible, shining person she was and cherish her. So when she called, her voice practically dancing through the phone line, and asked if she could bring him over for dinner, I didn't hesitate. I pulled out all the stops. I spent the afternoon making my chicken parmesan, the one with the crispy breading and the sauce that simmers for 6 hours, the one she'd begged for on every birthday as a little girl. I used my good china, the set I saved for holidays, and even bought a bottle of wine that cost more than $20. He arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, dressed in a tailored navy suit that looked like it was made for him, the kind of suit that whispers money without having to shout. In his hand he held a bouquet of a dozen perfect, long-stemmed red roses, their petals the color of deep velvet. He looked like he'd stepped right out of the pages of a magazine, a walking advertisement for success and sophistication. His smile was the first thing you noticed, wide, white, and so very practiced. It reached his eyes, but it didn't seem to warm them. "Mrs. Davison," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that seemed to fill my small living room. He handed me the flowers. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you. Jessica has told me so many wonderful things." For the first hour I let myself be charmed. I wanted to see what my daughter saw. He was flawless. He asked me about my 40-year career as a nurse, and unlike most people who just nod along politely, he leaned in, his gaze intense, asking thoughtful questions about the challenges, about the emotional toll. He made me feel fascinating. He complimented the food with such specific praise. "The sauce has such a depth of flavor, you can tell it's been made with patience," that it felt utterly sincere. He insisted on helping clear the table, and as he stood beside me at the sink, he rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt and made a charmingly self-deprecating joke about how his own mother's cooking could be used as a chemical weapon. He was funny, he was intelligent, and most importantly, he looked at my daughter with an expression of pure adoration that made her glow. But I spent 4 decades in the emergency room. You learn to watch people. You learn to spot the subtle signs, the little tells, the flicker in the eyes that separates genuine pain from a performance for prescription drugs. You learn to read what's not being said. And Mark, for all his polish, was performing. It wasn't just his perfect manners. It was the intense, laser-focused nature of his interest. It was too specific, too targeted. 3 separate times during that dinner, he skillfully steered the conversation back to the beach house at Siesta Key. The first time was casual, an easy lob into the conversation. "Jess tells me you have a beautiful place right on the water. That must be incredible." I smiled and agreed, telling him a short anecdote about a storm we once watched from the porch. The second time came during dessert, as he was savoring a bite of the key lime pie I'd made. "That property value in Siesta Key must have gone through the roof over the last 20 years. He mused, looking thoughtful. "With that kind of beachfront asset, have you ever thought about renting it out during the season? It could be a fantastic source of passive income for your retirement." "It's not for rent," I said, and my voice was a little cooler than I intended. The question felt probing. "That house is where we built our lives after Frank passed. It's filled with memories. It's family." Of course," he said quickly, flashing that polished, 1,000-watt grin again. It was a masterful recovery. Family history is priceless. You can't put a number on that. But his eyes lingered on me for a second too long, and in their depths, I saw something that wasn't charm. It was calculation. It was the look of a man running numbers in his head, assessing the value of an asset. The third time was the one that truly set off the alarm bells in my soul. He was at the door ready to leave. He took my hand, holding it warmly between both of his. "Thank you again for a wonderful evening, Carol. You've raised an extraordinary daughter. You must be so proud of her. And the legacy you've built for her." That word, legacy, it hung in the air between us, heavy and significant. He wasn't talking about her character, her kindness, or her accomplishments. He was talking about property. He was talking about inheritance. He seemed perfect, almost too perfect. But as a nurse, I learned to spot the symptoms before the disease takes hold. And that night, watching him guide Jessica down my driveway with a proprietary hand on her back, I saw the first signs of a sickness I couldn't yet name. The next day I called my best friend Linda. We've been friends since nursing school, seen each other through divorces, deaths, and every crisis in between. "There's something off about him, Linda," I said, pacing back and forth across my kitchen floor. "He's obsessed with the beach house. He's slick. Too slick. Linda let out her big booming laugh, the one that could always make me feel better. Oh, Carol. For heaven's sake, the man is trying to impress you. He's showing you he's serious about Jess, that he's thinking about the future, about being part of the family and your traditions. You've been on your own for so long you've forgotten what it's like. Don't go looking for trouble where there isn't any. I wanted to believe her. Lord, how I wanted to believe her. I wanted to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. But as I stood at my kitchen sink, staring out at the ancient oak trees dripping with Spanish moss, I remembered something my late husband Frank used to say. He was a contractor, a man who built things to last, a man who trusted solid foundations above all else. He told me once, "Careful of the slick ones, Carol. The ones with easy charm and quick answers. Real strength is quiet. Real value is built over time, not just declared." Mark had declared his value from the moment he walked in my door. That night, as I washed the fine china he'd insisted on helping with, a chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. I realized his questions weren't about joining our family. They were about conducting an appraisal of its assets. In the months that followed that first dinner, Mark's presence in Jessica's life grew like an invasive vine, its tendrils slowly and methodically wrapping around her, choking out everything and everyone else. At first, the changes were subtle, almost unnoticeable. The daily phone calls from Jess on her lunch break, a ritual we'd maintained for years, became a few calls a week. When I'd ask, she'd sound almost apologetic. "Things have just been so crazy at work, Mom," she'd say, or, "Mark and I had a last-minute lunch meeting." The spontaneous weekend drop-ins at the beach house, where she'd come to recharge and walk on the sand, stopped altogether. When I finally gently asked her why I hadn't seen her, her voice had a new defensive edge, a sharpness I'd never heard before. "Mark thinks I should focus more on us, Mom," she explained, and I could hear the quotation marks he had placed around the word us. "He says that successful couples, the ones who really make it, build their own world first. He thinks it's important for us to establish our own traditions. You understand, right?" "Of course, sweetheart," I'd say, forcing a brightness into my voice that felt like a lie. "If you're happy, then I'm happy." But I wasn't happy. I was heartbroken. I felt like I was watching my own daughter through a pane of glass that was growing thicker and more distorted every day. Her voice was getting fainter, her image smaller, as she drifted further away into his orbit. She was no longer speaking with her own voice. She was reciting his lessons, repeating the talking points from the Gospel of Mark. The real proof that I was being systematically pushed out came 6 months later. It was a Tuesday morning, a day like any other. I was drinking my coffee and scrolling through Facebook, the modern-day equivalent of the town square, looking at pictures of my friends' grandchildren and their vacation sunsets. And then I saw it. It wasn't a message or a call. It was a picture. A professionally lit, perfectly posed picture of Jessica's left hand. A massive glittering diamond on her ring finger, held up against the backdrop of some ridiculously fancy restaurant. The caption, bubbly and filled with emojis, read, "I said yes. I can't wait to start forever with the man of my dreams. I'm the luckiest girl in the world." The ceramic coffee cup grew cold in my hands. I felt the heat drain from my own face. My daughter was engaged, and I was finding out at the same time as her high school lab partner, her second cousin in Idaho, and a woman she met once on a cruise to Alaska. The comments were already pouring in. "Congratulations. He's a lucky guy. So happy for you both. When's the wedding?" Not a single person asked where her mother was or what I thought, because they all made the natural, loving assumption that I already knew, that I had been a part of it. My heart pounded a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless and giddy with excitement. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I was just about to call you. It just happened last night. It was a total surprise, and it was such a whirlwind. Mark surprised me at our favorite place, and then we went back to his apartment and called his parents, and they were so excited, and we were on the phone with them for hours, and it just got so late. I was going to call you first thing this morning, I swear." Her words tumbled out, a perfectly constructed, airtight alibi. But I knew. In the hierarchy of her new life, I wasn't the first call. I wasn't even the second. I was an item on a to-do list somewhere after posting the news to the entire world. Still, I swallowed the bitter pill of my own pain. This was her moment. "Congratulations, honey," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "Tell me everything." And she did. She gushed about the ring, the elaborate proposal, the way Mark's parents, who lived in a wealthy enclave in Palm Beach, had immediately started talking about throwing a lavish engagement party at their country club. "An engagement party?" I asked, a desperate flicker of hope igniting in my chest. "A chance to meet his family, to be included. When is it?" A pause. It was a small hesitation, but it was filled with a universe of meaning. Then her voice tightened. "It's next Saturday, actually, but it's really just for his side of the family, Mom. His mother she's very traditional. She has her own circle of friends, and she's planning everything. It's really more of a thing for their business associates and their friends. You know how it is." I didn't know how it is. I knew that when a girl gets engaged, her mother is supposed to be there beaming with pride. I knew that my own quiet dreams of helping her plan, of looking at wedding dresses, of being a part of her joy, were turning to smoke and ash right before my eyes. "And what do you think, Jess?" I asked quietly, my last hope. "I think Mark knows his family best," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "I want to start off on the right foot with them. It's important to him. You understand, right?" There it was again. That little phrase, polished smooth from overuse. "You understand, right?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. It meant don't argue. Don't make this difficult. Don't cause a scene. Just agree. I need to take a pause here because this part is hard to tell. This is where I started to feel like I was truly losing her. Watching my daughter become a stranger. A mouthpiece for his ambitions. A few weeks after that, she called to tell me that Mark felt I was a little too involved in her life. That he, a man who had known her for less than 2 years, thought it was unhealthy for a grown woman to talk to her mother every day. He was framing it as concern for her independence, for the health of their relationship as a couple, but I knew what it was. It was isolation. He was cutting the ropes one by one, until she was completely adrift in his ocean, with only him to cling to. Every excuse she gave, every new boundary she set, I could hear his voice behind hers, like a ventriloquist expertly pulling the strings of his puppet. But even then, I had no idea his next move would be to try and sever those strings for good. The phone call that finally ripped the veil from my eyes and showed me the true nature of the monster I was dealing with came on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was in my hall closet, a space that always smelled faintly of lavender and cedar, in the middle of the ordinary, peaceful task of reorganizing my linens. It was the kind of mundane chore I cherished in my retirement, a small pocket of order in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. When the phone rang, I saw Jessica's picture on the screen and smiled, a reflex born of 30 years of love. I answered, expecting a routine update, perhaps even an olive branch after weeks of strained conversations. Instead, the words she spoke next froze me where I stood, a stack of perfectly folded guest towels clutched to my chest. "Mom," she began, her voice cautious and carefully modulated, like someone testing the thin ice on a frozen pond. "I need to ask you something, and I really need you to just be cool about it." My stomach immediately tightened into a cold, hard knot. Nothing good, in the history of mother-daughter conversations, has ever followed that sentence. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, my own voice already on guard. "It's about the beach house," she said. I clutched the fluffy towels tighter, their softness a stark contrast to the sudden hardness in my chest. "Well, Mark, he says he doesn't feel completely comfortable there. He says he feels like it's not really ours, you know? Like he's always just a guest in your space, always under your microscope. And well, I always just assumed I'd inherit it from you anyway. It's part of my inheritance, right? So we were thinking maybe it's just time to make it official. Maybe it's time to just sign it over to us." For a moment, the narrow, cedar-scented hallway spun around me. Sign it over. The words didn't compute. They were alien, monstrous. That house wasn't just property. It wasn't just an asset on a balance sheet. It was the last tangible piece of Frank's legacy. It was the place I brought my daughter home from the hospital to. It was where she took her first steps in the sand, where we'd huddled together during hurricanes, where we'd grieved her father's death and slowly, painfully, built a new life for ourselves, just the two of us. It wasn't a house. It was the heart of our family. I cleared my throat, fighting to keep my voice steady. Jessica, that house has been our sanctuary for 20 years. It's not just a vacation spot. It's home. I know, Mom, I do, she said, her voice taking on that familiar, placating tone she now used whenever she was reciting one of Mark's scripts. It was a tone of feigned patience, as if she were speaking to a difficult child. But Mark feels like it puts a weird pressure on our relationship. He wants us to build our own special places, to start our own traditions, without feeling indebted. Indebted. The word struck me like a physical slap. It was so cruel, so calculated. I had never asked for a single thing from them, had never made them feel like anything other than welcome. But now he was twisting our shared history into a burden, our most precious memories into a debt. I tried to reason with her, telling her I would have to think about it, that a decision of that magnitude, involving her father's memory and her inheritance, couldn't be made over the phone. I thought that would buy me time. I thought that would be the end of it, at least for a while. I was so naive. I had grossly underestimated my enemy. A week later she called again. This time her voice was completely different. It was strained, filled with a manufactured theatrical worry that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Mom, she said, her voice hushed and serious. Mark and I were talking and, well, we're worried about you. Worried about me? I asked, completely baffled. Why on earth would you be worried about me? Well, you've seemed a little forgetful lately, she said, and the words sounded so foreign and ugly coming out of her mouth. Remember last month when you couldn't find your car keys for a few minutes? And that time you had your doctor's appointment written down on the wrong day? You just seem confused sometimes. My blood ran cold. He was taking normal, everyday slips of a 65-year-old mind and weaving them into a tapestry of incompetence. The car keys I'd misplaced for 5 minutes. The appointment I had written on the wrong line of my calendar. These were his exhibits A and B. Mark is a financial planner, you know, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were sharing a painful but necessary secret. He sees this kind of thing with his older clients all the time. It's the first sign. He thinks your memory has been slipping. I sank down onto the edge of my bed, the phone heavy as a lead weight in my hand. I couldn't speak. I could see his plan now, laid out with horrifying clarity. He suggested, she went on, delivering the killing blow, that maybe we should look into getting a power of attorney for you, just to help you manage things, to protect your assets and make sure everything is taken care of. He says it's the responsible thing to do, to make sure your inheritance for me is secure from any bad decisions. Finally clicked. This wasn't just about stealing my house anymore. This was a coup d'etat. He was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. He was trying to strip me of my autonomy, my dignity, my very personhood. He was trying to take everything, and he was using my own daughter, the person I loved most in the world, as his primary weapon. He was turning her love and concern for me into a tool to destroy me. After I somehow managed to end the call, I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at a framed photo on my nightstand. It was a picture of a 5-year-old Jess on that very beach at Siesta Key. Her face bright with sunshine and a missing front tooth, my arms wrapped tight around her. He was trying to steal that too. The memory of that perfect day. Finally, the paralysis broke, and a wave of pure, cold fury washed over me. I picked up the phone and called Linda. The whole ugly story came tumbling out, punctuated not by tears this time, but by ragged, angry breaths. Linda didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, her voice was quiet, but it was as hard as steel. Carol, she said, listen to me. This isn't your Jess talking. That girl would rather cut off her own arm than hurt you. This is a monster wearing your daughter's face. He's not just a gold digger. He's a predator. You need to fight back. Not for the house. You fight for your daughter. You fight for yourself. He wasn't just trying to steal my house anymore. He was trying to steal my mind, my dignity, my future. That was the moment I stopped grieving for the daughter I was losing and started planning to get her back. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The morning after that monstrous phone call, I did something I never in my 65 years imagined I would do. I drove to a rundown part of town, to a small, unassuming office above a bail bondsman. The sign on the door just said, Mike O'Malley Private Investigations. Mike was an old friend of Frank's from their army days, A retired homicide detective with tired, bloodhound eyes that had seen the absolute worst of human nature. He was a no-nonsense guy who lived on black coffee and unfiltered cigarettes. We sat in his cluttered office, which smelled of stale coffee and decades of old case files. "I need you to look into my daughter's fiancé," I said, my voice tight. I slid a photo of Mark's smiling, handsome face across the dusty desk. "I can't explain it, Mike, but something in my gut tells me he's a liar and a thief." Mike picked up the photo, studied it for a long moment, then looked at me over the rims of his glasses. "A gut feeling isn't admissible in court, Carol. My gut feelings kept patients from dying in the air for 40 years. I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "It's all I have. Just look into his finances, his history. See if the man he presents to the world is the man he actually is." I wrote him a check from the savings account I had guarded so carefully since Frank's death. The fund I'd always thought would be for Jessica's wedding or a down payment on her first home. Now it was a war chest. A week later, Mike called, and the news was a bucket of cold water on my burning anger. "He's clean, Carol," he said, his voice flat with a professional lack of interest. "I ran everything. His credit score is north of 800, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. The degrees from Wharton check out. He's a senior investment manager at a very reputable firm. As far as any official paper trail goes, the guy's a saint. Are you sure you're not just a mother who doesn't like the guy her daughter picked?" His question stung because it was exactly what Mark wanted me to believe about myself. My heart sank into my shoes. For a moment, a terrifying moment, I let myself wonder. Was I wrong? Was this all in my head? Was I just a paranoid, controlling old woman just like Mark was trying to make me out to be? I thanked Mike for his time and hung up, feeling utterly defeated, the fight draining out of me. That evening, desperate for a connection to a time when things were simple, I went up into the attic. I was looking for old photo albums, needing to see my daughter's real, uncomplicated smile again. I was rummaging through a large, dusty steamer trunk filled with Frank's old things, his army uniform, his college textbooks, blueprints for houses he'd built. My hand brushed against a small leather-bound book at the bottom. It was one of his old address books from the late 1980s, from the height of his career as a real estate developer. The pages were yellowed and brittle. I sat on the dusty floor of the attic, the single light bulb casting long shadows, and flipped through the pages, a wave of bittersweet nostalgia washing over me. And then I saw it. A name written in Frank's neat, all-caps blocky handwriting. William Morrison, Florida Real Estate Ventures. Underneath it was a phone number and a short, cryptic note. "Call Lawyer Re. Missing funds." The name hit me like a physical blow. Morrison. It wasn't a common name. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, snaked its way up my spine. It had to be a coincidence. It was a long shot, a crazy paranoid leap of logic. But I couldn't shake the feeling, the same gut feeling I'd had from the very beginning. The next morning my hand was trembling as I called Mike back. "I have a name," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "William Morrison. He was a real estate developer here in Florida back in the late 80s. He was a business partner of Frank's. Can you please just see if there's any connection?" I could hear the skepticism in Mike's sigh through the phone, but he agreed to look into it. This time, when Mike called back 2 days later, his voice was completely different. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a tight, urgent energy. "Carol," he said, his voice low. "You need to sit down. Are you sitting down?" He met me back at the same greasy diner. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He pushed a thin, worn file folder across the sticky tabletop. "Mark's full name isn't Mark Johnson like he told your daughter and like it says on his social media," he said, his tired eyes now sharp and focused. "His birth name is Mark William Morrison." I just stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words, the name a death knell in the noisy diner. "William Morrison was his grandfather," Mike continued, his voice dropping even lower. "And he wasn't just Frank's business partner. He was the man who systematically destroyed him. Back in 1989, Morrison liquidated their joint company's assets, embezzled every penny from their development accounts. We're talking close to $5 million in today's money, and vanished. He left Frank bankrupt, holding the bag for all the debt and the lawsuits from the investors. The stress of it all, the years of legal battles trying to recover something, anything. Carol, the doctors told you the stress contributed to his first heart attack. This man's family is the reason you're a widow. My hand trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were yellowed, brittle newspaper clippings from the Tampa Tribune. Local developer vanishes amid fraud allegations. Investors left with nothing as partner disappears. There was a grainy photo of a younger William Morrison, smiling, confident, handsome. He had the same eyes as Mark. The same predator's smile. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening certainty. The intense interest in the house. The systematic isolation of my daughter. The cruel, calculated attempt to have me declared incompetent. This wasn't a romance, it was a long con. It was a multi-generational vendetta. Mark had researched us. He knew about the inheritance that was left from Frank's life insurance policy, the money I had so carefully invested. He knew everything. He was here to finish the job his grandfather had started. My family wasn't just being conned, we were being hunted. And my daughter was the final pawn in his family's sick, twisted game. The phone call from Jessica came 3 days after the soul-shattering revelation in that greasy diner. It was the call where she informed me of her marriage, the call where she told me I didn't matter, the call where she demanded I FedEx the keys to the beach house. This time I was ready. The grieving, confused mother was gone, replaced by someone cold, clear and focused. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, and the sweetness in my voice was so pure it was poison. "I'll send them right out. I'll even include a little wedding gift to celebrate." After I hung up the phone, I didn't cry. I didn't pace the floor. I went to work. For the next 72 hours, my small sun-drenched kitchen table, the site of countless family meals and homework sessions, became a war room. The air buzzed with the quiet hum of my printer and the rustle of papers. I spent every waking moment assembling what I had come to think of as my wedding gift. I wasn't just going to expose Mark. I was going to meticulously, forensically dismantle him, piece by undeniable piece, using nothing but the cold, hard, documented truth. First, I laid out the documents Mike had managed to unearth about Mark's own predatory history. There were copies of 2 other marriage licenses, one from Texas, one from Illinois. Both had been officially filed with the county clerk, but the weddings, Mike discovered, had never taken place. He had tracked down the women. One was the daughter of a wealthy Texas oilman, the other an heiress to a Chicago hotel fortune. I spoke to both of them on the phone. Their stories were chillingly, sickeningly familiar. A whirlwind romance with a charming, successful man. A quick engagement. A sudden, subtle campaign to isolate them from their families, convincing them their parents were controlling and didn't trust their judgment. And then the final push. An attempt to gain access to their assets or a signature on a prenuptial agreement that would have given him control of their trust funds. Both engagements had ended abruptly when suspicious fathers with deep pockets started hiring their own lawyers and investigators. Next to those damning documents, I placed the bank records. They were a complex, dizzying web of transactions, but Mike had hired a forensic accountant who had traced the money. The report showed a clear, unbroken line from a series of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, accounts that the accountant had definitively linked back to the money William Morrison had stolen from my Frank all those years ago, to a trust fund that Mark had been living off of his entire adult life. It was blood money, stolen from my family's future, and he had been using it to fund his predatory lifestyle. The salary from his legitimate job was just a cover. Then came the centerpiece of my collection. I carefully arranged the old, yellowed newspaper clippings from the Tampa Tribune archives. The headline screamed from the page, "Ghosts from a past I never fully understood." Local developer vanishes amid multi-million-dollar fraud allegations. Investors left with nothing as partner disappears. And right there, in stark black and white, was the detailed, heartbreaking story of how William Morrison had systematically bankrupted my husband and destroyed his reputation. I even found a copy of the original civil lawsuit Frank had filed, his strong, honest name printed clearly on the court documents. It was the history Mark had tried to bury. Finally, as a finishing touch, I printed out a fresh, notarized copy of Frank's last will and testament and his estate records. They clearly showed that Jessica, and only Jessica, was the sole heir to his legacy, including the beach house he had bought for us with the last of his honest money, a sanctuary he intended for his wife and daughter, not for the grandson of the man who destroyed him. I took all of it, the licenses, the accountant's report, the bank statements, the incriminating articles, the court records, and arranged them in a precise chronological order inside a beautiful dark leather portfolio I bought specifically for the occasion. It looked professional, official, irrefutable. On top of the stack, I placed a single sheet of my best, cream-colored Crane and Company stationery. On it, I wrote a short, simple note in my neatest, most elegant script. Every new husband should know his wife's family history. Welcome to the family, Mark. With love, Carol. I slid the note inside, closed the portfolio with a satisfying click, and then I wrapped it. I used the most beautiful, expensive silver wrapping paper I could find, paper that shimmered under the light. I tied it with a thick, elegant white satin bow, the kind you see in bridal magazines. It was the most beautiful package I'd ever wrapped. It looked festive, celebratory, like a cherished gift of love. But I knew it was a declaration of war. A meticulously documented, perfectly packaged bomb. Friday morning, I dressed carefully, drove to their upscale apartment building in downtown Tampa, the one with the valets and the rooftop pool. I walked through the gleaming marble lobby, nodding politely at the doorman, the heavy portfolio clutched in my hands like a briefcase. I took the silent, wood-paneled elevator to the 12th floor. I set the gifts squarely in front of their door, on the welcome mat that read, "The Morrisons." Then I rang the bell, a loud, clear chime that echoed in the silent, carpeted hallway, and walked away without looking back. I drove home, my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in months. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the animal to scream. I didn't have to wait long. The quiet in my house felt different now. It wasn't the lonely quiet of the past few months. It was the tense, charged quiet of a hunter in a blind, waiting. It was exactly 2:17 p.m. I had just poured myself a tall glass of iced tea and was sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I had assembled my weapon of truth. The phone rang, its cheerful electronic tune, a jarring contrast to the tension in the room. It flashed Jessica's name and her smiling picture on the screen. I let it ring once, then twice, a small, cruel part of me wanting them to wait. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, the cold liquid a balm to my suddenly dry throat, and then I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly even. The sound that erupted from the receiver was not my daughter's. It was a raw, unhinged roar of pure animalistic fury. "What the hell did you do, you crazy old witch?" It was Mark. His smooth, practiced, a man-of-the-world baritone was completely gone, stripped away to reveal the ugly, snarling beast beneath. I could picture him perfectly. His handsome, carefully curated face twisted into an ugly mask of rage, the expensive silver wrapping paper probably torn to shreds on the floor of their pristine apartment. The portfolio's contents likely scattered across their coffee table, like the wreckage of a car crash. I took another slow sip of my tea before I responded. I set the glass down on its coaster with a soft, deliberate click. "Hello, Mark," I said, my voice as cool and placid as a winter lake. "I take it you've opened your wedding gift." "Gift? You call this garbage a gift?" he shrieked, his voice cracking with the strain. "This is harassment. This is slander. This is insane. I'm calling the police, you psycho. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for every penny you have." His words tumbled over each other in a frantic, desperate cascade of threats. He was a cornered animal, flailing and biting at the bars of a cage he hadn't even seen being built around him. He was losing control, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "Go ahead, Mark," I said softly, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "Report me. Call the Tampa Police Department and tell them that your new mother-in-law sent you a box filled with public records. Tell them she sent you copies of your previous marriage licenses. Tell them she sent you archived newspaper articles and official court filings. I'm sure they will be absolutely fascinated to learn all about your family's long and storied history of grand larceny and financial fraud." In the background, for the very first time, I heard my daughter's voice. It was small, fragile, trembling. "Mark, calm down. Please just calm down. What is all this? Let me talk to her." "Stay out of it, Jessica," he bellowed, and the sheer venom in his voice directed at her was chilling. It was the voice of a master who had just had his favorite toy taken away. "Your mother is insane. She's making all of this up. She's trying to ruin us." I spoke again, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. Each word precise and weighted with truth. No, Mark. I'm not ruining you. I'm simply giving you back the truth you tried so hard to bury. Did you enjoy the articles about your grandfather, William? About how he destroyed my husband's life and left him to die in debt? Or perhaps you preferred the forensic accountant's report, the one showing you've been living off that stolen money for your entire adult life. Money that, by all rights, belongs to my daughter as part of her father's rightful inheritance. Silence. A thick, heavy, suffocating silence. The frantic rage was gone. Then his voice, when it came, was low and laced with something new. Something he had probably never felt before. Pure cold fear. You're lying. I never lie, I said, my voice dropping to an almost whisper, forcing him to strain to hear me. I was a nurse. We're trained to be precise about facts. We deal in life and death, not in fantasies. But don't take my word for it. The law firm that handled your grandfather's estate in the Cayman Islands? Rodriguez and Sons? Mr. Rodriguez is an old man now, but he has an excellent memory. He remembers your family very well. He's expecting your call. It was a complete bluff, a shot in the dark, but it landed like a bullet. In the distance, I heard Jessica again, her voice cracking, breaking with the first horrifying wave of doubt, a sound that was both heartbreaking and triumphant. Mark, what is she talking about? What embezzlement? I didn't wait for his answer. I had planted the seed of truth in the only soil that mattered. I pressed the end call button on my phone, and the connection was severed. The silence that filled my kitchen was the sound of victory. For the first time, it wasn't anger in his voice, it was pure cold fear. I had finally broken through the mask. Now, I just had to pray that my daughter would have the strength to see the monster standing in the rubble. The next 2 days were the longest and most excruciating of my life. The triumphant silence in my house quickly soured into an agony of waiting. I barely slept. I ate toast standing over the sink, unable to sit still. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat, only to plummet when it was a telemarketer or my friend Linda calling to check in. I kept replaying that final moment of the phone call in my head, but the sound that haunted me wasn't Mark's rage or his fear. It was the broken, whispered question from my daughter. What is she talking about? I had loaded the gun and aimed it. All I could do now was pray that the bullet had hit its intended target and hadn't ricocheted, destroying the one person I was trying to save. On Sunday morning, the sky was a bruised, heavy gray, threatening rain. I was sitting on my porch, staring blankly at my prize-winning orchids, when a familiar blue car pulled slowly into my driveway. It was Jessica's. She got out of the car and just stood there for a long moment, looking small and lost in the vastness of my front yard. Her usually perfect blonde hair was unwashed and pulled back into a messy bun. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was wearing the same gray university sweatshirt and yoga pants she'd had on 2 days ago. She looked like she had been hollowed out from the inside. She walked up the steps with the slow, heavy tread of an old woman and sat down on the top step, not next to me but below me with her back to me. She didn't say hello. She just stared out at the quiet suburban street. After a long, painful minute of silence, she spoke, her voice hoarse and raw. Tell me everything. So I did. Over cups of hot, strong coffee at my kitchen table, the table where she'd once done her math homework, I laid it all out. I walked her through Mike's investigation, through the painful history of her father's financial ruin, through Mark's predatory history of preying on other unsuspecting women. I didn't embellish. I didn't say, I told you so. I just gave her the facts, calmly and quietly, one devastating truth after another. I expected her to argue, to defend him, to accuse me of being jealous or vindictive. Instead, she just listened, her face a pale, unreadable mask, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her coffee cup. When I finished, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She reached into the oversized purse sitting on the chair beside her and pulled out a thin manila folder, sliding it across the polished wood of the table toward me. Her hand was trembling. I found these, she said, her voice flat and devoid of all emotion. He stormed out after his call with you, screaming about his lawyers. He was so busy, so consumed with rage, he left his laptop open. He forgot. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails. Dozens and dozens of them. They were between Mark and some man named Marcus Webb. a financial manager in the Cayman Islands. They were discussing, in cold, clinical detail, the best methods for accessing and liquidating the Morrison inheritance accounts. The email chains went back 2 years, long before he had ever laid eyes on my daughter. And then I saw the one that made my blood freeze solid in my veins. It was an email from Mark to Marcus. Attached was a file, a detailed multi-page background check on me and on Jessica. It included our full financial histories, Frank's entire estate value, his life insurance payout, and a detailed market appraisal of the Siesta Key Beach house. The subject line of the email read simply, Phase 1 target. He researched me, Mom, she whispered, her voice finally breaking, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. He knew about Dad. He knew about the house. He knew everything before he ever said hello to me. Meeting me wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't fate. It was an ambush. Her eyes hardened then, and the tears stopped as quickly as they had started. After he left, I did something he always told me not to do. I thought for myself. I found the name of one of his ex-fiancées from your gift, Emma Harrison in Texas. I found her on social media. I called her. What did she say? I asked gently, my heart aching for her. Everything, Jessica said, her voice raw with a pain that was deeper than sadness. It was the pain of utter violation. She told me how he isolated her from her family, how he convinced her that her wealthy father was trying to control her with money, how he tried to get her to sign over control of her trust fund just weeks before the wedding. It was our story, Mom. It was my story. Word for word. Then she put me in touch with the other woman from Chicago, Sarah. And it was the same exact story all over again. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was as cold as ice. Sweetheart, I am so sorry. She pulled her hand back, not out of anger, but to wipe her eyes with a fierce final gesture. No, she said, her voice shaking with a new kind of strength, a strength born from the ashes of her shattered life. Don't you apologize. You were the only one telling the truth. I let him turn me against you. I pushed you away when you were the only one trying to pull me back to shore. But that's over now. She looked up and met my eyes, and in her gaze, I saw the daughter I thought I had lost, the strong, intelligent woman I had raised. Now, she said, her voice low and dangerous, we're going to destroy him. And I need your help. In that moment, I saw the daughter I had raised return to me. Not the broken girl, but a woman forged in the fires of betrayal. Mark wanted a war with one of us. Now he was about to get a war with both. We didn't go to the local police. Not at first. My daughter, the quiet, agreeable girl who had always avoided confrontation, had been transformed overnight into a cold, calculating strategist. The shock had burned away her naivete, leaving behind something hard and sharp as steel. He'll have high-priced lawyers on retainer who will immediately paint this as a messy family dispute. He said, she said, situation, she said, her voice clear and focused as we sat at my kitchen table, the damning email spread out before us. They'll portray you as a meddling, vindictive mother-in-law and me as a scorned woman. We need more than a local cop taking a report. We need a cannon, not a pea shooter. So our first stop was the gleaming downtown office of a man named David Chin, one of the top financial fraud attorneys in the state of Florida. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s with intelligent, watchful eyes that didn't miss a single detail. We sat in his plush conference room on the 40th floor. The entire city of Tampa sprawling out below us like a map. For 2 solid hours we laid out the entire sordid story. Jessica did most of the talking. She was incredible. She presented the evidence, the emails, the timeline of his deceptions, the stories from the other women, the financial documents, with a calm, methodical precision that would have made a seasoned prosecutor proud. She had organized everything into a binder, with tabs and highlighted sections. When she was finished, Sean leaned back in his enormous leather chair and steepled his fingers, looking from Jessica to me and back again. He was silent for a full minute, his gaze distant as he processed the sheer scale of the deception. What you have here, he said finally, his voice grave and measured, is far beyond a simple case of a man trying to swindle his wife out of her inheritance. The use of offshore accounts, the clear pattern of behavior across state lines, the scale of the original theft from your late husband. This is federal jurisdiction. We're talking about wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto ours. You don't have enough to sue him in civil court. You have enough to bury him in federal prison. He was the one who made the call. He told us that the FBI's Tampa field office had a small but tenacious white-collar crime unit. He knew the agent in charge. He explained that they had been tracking whispers of a sophisticated, multi-state fraud ring that specifically targeted wealthy families with inheritances, but they had never been able to get a man on the inside, a direct link. Our case, he said, with its meticulously documented history and the predator still in play, might be the key they've been looking for to unlock the entire operation. 2 days later, we were sitting in a stark, gray, windowless room at the federal building, across a cold metal table from a woman named Agent Peterson. She was in her late 40s, with a no-nonsense haircut and a tired, skeptical expression that told me she had heard every sob story imaginable. At first, I could tell she thought exactly what Jessica had predicted, that this was just another messy divorce, a domestic squabble that had somehow landed on her desk by mistake. She listened with a professional, practiced detachment as Jessica began to speak, her hands folded neatly on the table. But as my daughter laid out the evidence, piece by undeniable piece, I saw Agent Peterson's posture change. She started leaning forward, her skepticism visibly melting away. When Jessica slid the printouts of the emails from Mark's laptop across the table, the ones with the subject line Phase 1 target, and the attached background checks, Peterson's eyes narrowed. She picked them up, her expression shifting from detached boredom to one of intense, focused interest. She spent the next hour poring over our documents, occasionally asking sharp, pointed questions that cut right to the heart of the matter. Finally, she looked up, first at Jessica, then at me, her gaze lingering on my daughter's resolute face. We've been tracking a series of similar schemes for the last 18 months, she said, her voice now devoid of any doubt or skepticism. The targets are always recently married or engaged women with significant family assets. The methodology is always the same: a whirlwind romance, a quick engagement, and then a systematic campaign to isolate the woman from her family, discredit them, and gain financial control. But we've never been able to get a man on the inside. We've never had a victim who was willing and able to cooperate before the money was already gone and the perpetrator had vanished. She paused, her gaze locking onto Jessica. If you're willing, we can set up a controlled operation. We can get him on tape. We can get him to admit to everything. But it will be dangerous. You will have to face him again, and you will have to lie. You have to understand how terrifying this was for Jess. The thought of having to face the man who had systematically dismantled her life, her confidence, her very identity, and to have to pretend that she still loved him, still believed in him. I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, a shadow of the woman she had been just a week ago. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a steely resolve that made me prouder than I have ever been. She looked directly at Agent Peterson, her chin held high. "I'll do it," she said, her voice not wavering for a single second. "Tell me what I need to do." That Friday, Mark walked back into the apartment he shared with my daughter, a bouquet of her favorite lilies in his hand, his handsome face a perfect mask of contrition, ready to deliver his final, most convincing performance. He had no idea he was walking onto a stage set by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the final curtain was about to fall hard. The apartment felt like a stage set for a very tense play. A tiny, powerful microphone was expertly hidden in a silk flower arrangement on the coffee table, another concealed in a reading lamp by the sofa. A small, flat, state-of-the-art recording device was securely taped beneath Jessica's blouse, right over her heart, its cold metallic presence a constant reminder of the stakes. I was 2 blocks away, crammed into the back of an unmarked surveillance van with Agent Peterson and a young, focused technician who was surrounded by screens and audio equipment. A headset was pressed so tightly against my ear that I could hear my own pulse thudding a nervous rhythm. Through that headset, I could hear everything inside that apartment with a terrifying clarity. The slight, nervous tremor in my daughter's hand as she took the flowers from him, the deep, feigned sincerity in Mark's carefully modulated voice. "I've been a fool, Jess," he began, his voice dripping with a rich, manufactured regret that he had no doubt perfected over years of practice. "A complete and utter fool. I let your mother get in my head. I let her poison me against you. She's manipulative, she's always been jealous of the connection we have. But I won't let her come between us ever again. I love you. That's the only truth that matters. My hands clenched into tight, bloodless fists in my lap. Listening to his poison, hearing him twist my love for my daughter into a weapon, knowing what I knew now, was a unique and exquisite form of torture. I had to physically restrain myself from crying out. I love you too, Mark, Jessica said, and the steadiness in her voice, the sheer acting ability she was summoning from some hidden reserve of strength, made a wave of fierce protective pride wash over me. But I'm scared. All those documents my mom sent. The things she said about your grandfather and my dad's salary, his whole life savings disappearing. Lies, he said smoothly, dismissing a man's life's work with a wave of his hand. All of it. Twists and half-truths and exaggerations from a bitter, lonely old woman who can't stand to see you happy. Your father's business failed. It happens every day. My grandfather had nothing to do with it. She's just trying to control you, to control your inheritance, the way she's always done. This was the moment. In the van, Agent Peterson gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the technician beside her. Jessica knew her cue. It was time to spring the trap. So there is no inheritance? She asked, her voice laced with a perfect, heartbreaking blend of confusion and disappointment. The millions of dollars she was talking about, it isn't real? I heard him sigh, a heavy, patronizing sound of a man burdened with a foolish woman's ignorance. Oh, the money's real, sweetheart, he said, his voice dropping, becoming intimate, conspiratorial, the voice of a snake oil salesman about to close a deal. It's very real. But it's tied up in complicated offshore accounts. It's my family's money, and she's trying to lay claim to it through some ancient history, some failed business deal. She's trying to steal from us. He paused, and I could hear the sound of him moving closer to her on the sofa. But I have a way to access it. A way to move it through a series of trusts so it's clean, untraceable. So it's ours. Forever. Ours. Jessica whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of a dawning, greedy hope. Yes, ours, he said, his voice now filled with a triumphant excitement. He thought he was winning. He thought he was moments away from closing the biggest deal of his life. Look, forget your mother. You want the absolute truth? Fine. The truth is, I married you to combine our legacies. To make us a powerhouse. That money, your father's stolen estate, as your mother so dramatically calls it, it rightfully belongs in the hands of people who know what to do with it. People like us. The air in the surveillance van was electric. The young technician gave Agent Peterson a silent, emphatic thumbs up. They had it. He had just confessed to conspiracy and intent to commit wire fraud on a federal wire. But Jessica, my brilliant, brave daughter, had one more question. One final nail for his coffin. So, she said, her voice as clear and sharp as a ringing bell in my headset. To be perfectly clear for my own peace of mind, you are admitting that you married me specifically to get control of what you believe is my father's money. I heard him laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. It was a short, arrogant, dismissive chuckle. The laugh of a predator who has finally cornered its prey. Yes, he said. Of course. And you should be grateful. With me, you'll never have to worry about a thing again. All I need is your signature on these transfer documents from the lawyer, and we can begin our new life together. FBI. Open the door. The command was so loud it crackled and distorted in my headset. It was followed instantly by the explosive, splintering crash of a battering ram obliterating the apartment door. A chorus of agents stormed in, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of authority. Hands where I can see them. Get down on the ground. Down on the ground now. Mark's arrogant chuckle died in his throat, replaced by a choked, pathetic gasp of utter disbelief. His perfect mask, the one he had worn for 2 years, shattered into a million pieces. The charming fiancé, the successful financial planner, the man of the world, all of it vanished in an instant, leaving only a terrified, cornered con man, blinking in the harsh light of reality. As they pushed him out of the building and into a waiting unmarked car, cuffed and defeated, his head bowed, his eyes scanned the street, and for a split second, they met mine through the tinted window of the van. The charm was gone. The fake regret was gone. All that was left in his eyes was a look of pure, pathetic hatred. He had lost. And we had won. Mark's arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a long, grueling, and emotionally draining 6 weeks. His family, the wealthy, traditional Morrisons from Palm Beach, hired a team of high-priced, shark-like lawyers from Miami. Their strategy was clear from day one: to tear me and my daughter apart on the stand. They tried to paint me as a meddling, vindictive, and mentally unstable mother-in-law, obsessed with my daughter's life and jealous of her newfound happiness. They tried to paint Jessica as a scorned, hysterical woman who, when faced with the possibility of a divorce, had been coerced by a manipulative mother and an overzealous FBI into entrapping her loving, innocent husband. But they couldn't argue with the one thing they didn't have: the truth, recorded in crystal-clear audio. The trial became bigger than just us. The evidence from Mark's laptop, combined with the information we had provided and the confession on the wire, allowed the FBI to unravel a multi-state fraud ring. What had started with my simple, desperate wedding gift ended with the indictment of 4 other individuals, including the financial manager in the Cayman Islands. Our personal nightmare had become the key to dismantling a network that had been preying on families for over a decade. The day Jessica took the stand was the most terrifying and the proudest day of my life. She walked to the witness box with a quiet dignity, her posture straight, her gaze steady. She looked directly at the 12 men and women in the jury box, ordinary people just like us, and she told her story. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply and powerfully recounted the last 2 years of her life. The defense attorney, a slick man with a cruel smile, was relentless. He tried to twist her words to make her seem foolish, greedy, unstable. "Isn't it true, Ms. Davison," he sneered at one point, "that you were angry your mother didn't approve of your marriage, and this whole elaborate scheme was a way to get back at her?" Jessica looked not at him but at the jury. "No, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's true that I was a fool. I was a fool who wanted to be loved so badly that I ignored my own instincts and betrayed the one person who had never ever betrayed me. This man," she said, finally turning to look directly at Mark, "didn't just try to steal my money. He tried to steal my mother. He tried to steal my memories. He tried to convince me that my own mind was a liability, and that my only value was my bank account and my inheritance. He tried to steal my belief in myself." The courtroom was utterly silent. Then Emma and Sarah, the 2 other ex-fiancés from Texas and Chicago, took the stand. Their stories, told in their own calm, resolute voices, were devastatingly similar to ours. They painted a clear, undeniable picture of a cold, methodical predator who had refined his scheme over years, leaving a trail of broken hearts, fractured families, and empty bank accounts in his wake. Mark sat there at the defendant's table day after day, his mask of handsome charm firmly back in place for the jury, but I could see the cracks. I could see the slight tremor in his hand, the way his jaw muscle clenched whenever a particularly damning piece of evidence was presented. During a recess one afternoon, as they were leading him out of the courtroom, he passed close by me in the hallway where I was standing alone. He leaned toward his lawyer but turned his head just enough for his words to reach me, a low, venomous whisper that was meant only for me. "You'll regret this, you old witch." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just looked him straight in the eye. He was trying to get a reaction, one last flicker of fear to feed his pathetic ego. I gave him nothing. He no longer had any power over me. His threats were just the pathetic whimpers of a caged animal about to be put down. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the jury box, their faces were grim and resolved. I held Jessica's hand under the table, our fingers intertwined so tightly they ached. The court clerk took the verdict form from the foreman. The foreman stood, a large, weary-looking man, and cleared his throat. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we the jury find the defendant guilty." He continued down the long list of charges: money laundering, interstate fraud, conspiracy. And the verdict was the same for each one: guilty, guilty, guilty. A soft sob escaped Jessica's lips, a sound not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated relief. At the sentencing a week later, the judge, a stern, white-haired man, looked down at Mark over his spectacles, not with anger, but with a kind of weary disgust. "You didn't just steal money, Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice ringing with a cold, clear authority that filled the chamber. "You preyed on the most fundamental of human connections. the bond of love and the sacred trust of family. You systematically turned a daughter against her mother. You treated people as nothing more than entries in a financial ledger. He brought his gavel down with a loud final crack that seemed to shake the very room, sealing Mark's fate. 15 years in federal prison. The sentence was heavier than we expected, thanks to the evidence of the larger criminal conspiracy he was a part of. He was ordered to pay full restitution to all his victims. For Jessica, that meant the courts would begin the long, complicated process of seizing and liquidating his assets to repay the nearly $5 million that his family had stolen from ours all those years ago. It wasn't about the money. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming a stolen legacy. As the judge's gavel fell, it felt like the final chapter of a long, dark, terrifying nightmare had finally closed. But our story, the story of my daughter and me, was just beginning again. We're on the porch of the Siesta Key house now. The sun is just beginning to rise over the Gulf of Mexico. A spectacular, silent explosion of pale pink and soft, molten orange that is painting the underside of the clouds. The air is warm and thick with the smell of salt and possibility, and the only sound is the gentle, rhythmic shushing of the waves on the sand, a sound that has been the soundtrack to my entire life. My daughter, my Jessica, is sitting next to me in a weathered white wicker chair, her bare feet propped up on the railing, a steaming cup of coffee cradled in her hands. She looks peaceful. For the first time in 2 long painful years, she looks truly deeply peaceful. We spent the whole weekend here, after the trial ended. We needed to reclaim it. We needed to fill it with new light. We didn't talk much about Mark or the trial. Instead, we opened the old dusty photo albums that I brought from my house. We sat on the floor side by side, and laughed until we cried at pictures of a sunburnt, 5-year-old Jessica with a crooked, gap-toothed sandcastle, and a deeply awkward teenage Jess with a disastrous home haircut that we had both thought was a good idea at the time. We were actively, consciously reclaiming this house, scrubbing it clean of his memory, and filling it not with the ghosts of what we had almost lost, but with the vibrant, living memories of what we had always truly had. Last night, as we sat on this same porch, watching the stars prick the dark velvet of the sky, she turned to me, her eyes shining in the dim light from the house. "Next time I get married, Mom," she said, her voice soft but as sure and steady as the tide, and she reached out and took my hand. "It'll be right here on this sand barefoot. There will be no country clubs, no fancy suits. And he'll have to love you as much as he loves me. That's the new non-negotiable rule." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, and we just sat there for a long time in a comfortable, healing silence, listening to the eternal rhythm of the ocean. I thought about the wedding gift I had sent, that strange, terrible package filled with ugly, inconvenient truths. It wasn't the gift a mother ever wants to give her child. It wasn't beautiful or celebratory, but it was the gift that saved her. It was the gift that brought her home, not just to this house but back to herself. I wanted to tell this story, my story, for a very specific reason, because I know I'm not the only one out there. I know there are women and men watching this right now who have felt that same cold chill of betrayal from someone they love. Someone who tried to make them feel small or crazy or paranoid or worthless. Someone who tried to take their voice away and replace it with their own. So this is what I want to leave you with. Trust your instincts. As mothers, as women, as human beings, we are all blessed with a kind of ancient wisdom that runs deeper than logic. It's that little voice in the back of your head, that knot in your stomach. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Don't ever let anyone, no matter how much you love them or want to believe in them, make you doubt that quiet, persistent voice inside you. It is the truest, most reliable compass you will ever have. My daughter was manipulated by an expert, a predator in a bespoke suit, but she came back. The truth was a harsh and blinding light, but it was that light that allowed her to finally see the path back to herself. And that's the real power we all have. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it felt incredibly important. I have a question for all of you who have taken the time to listen. Have you ever had a gut feeling about a person or a situation that turned out to be right? A moment where your intuition screamed at you and saved you or someone you love from a terrible situation? Please, share your experience in the comments below. Reading your stories reminds us all that we are not alone in these struggles, and there is strength in our shared wisdom. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribe for more true stories. Your story might just give someone else the strength they need to listen to their own inner voice. Because in the end, truth is a light that no amount of darkness can ever extinguish. And once it's unwrapped, it can never ever be taken back.